Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Whole Elephant. Welcome back if you've been on this journey with me of trying to see the whole elephant in life, see every perspective, not just the perspective that we grew up with, not just the perspective that we're living in now. And welcome if this is your first time. You're probably a fan of my guest today, and that's awesome. I want to thank everyone, first of all, for the reaction to last week's podcast with Ralph Winter. I had so many great conversations with people out of that podcast, and I just appreciate Ralph so much. He always has great insights, and is just such a smart dude. My guest today is Julianna Zobrist. I'm so excited to have her on. I found her work through my wife, who loved her fashion sense, first of all, was so drawn to that. And then we both realized, wow, she really has good stuff to say as well. And so I was so thrilled that I got a chance to talk to her. We talked about some really, really important things that are going on in the church today, and really what Imago Dei means. And so sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the chat. Julianna, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is fun. Right off the bat, I want to say I've had this weird run of podcast interviews where I am matching exactly what my guest is matching.
No way. Wait,
So
we're not matching right now.
I know. I knew today that your fashion sense would be 1,000 times ahead of mine. So I was not worried about that happening.
Oh my gosh,
today.
wait, I have an orange t-shirt on underneath. I'm not even kidding you. We are kind of matching. Look, I'm wearing Sublime. We're
Perfect.
matching.
Perfect.
I have to tell you though that I don't know, call it serendipity, call it divinity. I'm not sure, but I was literally reading about the blind man and the elephant, like the Indian parable, when I got the message from your wife, whom I'm a massive fan of. So for all of your listeners, she's just phenomenal artist. Everyone needs to follow her. But she reached out to me literally as I was on my DMs going through reading messages from people. Someone sent me the blind man and the elephant, and then I got your message as well. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Very serendipitous. Yes.
Yeah, that's a poem that our pastor used in a sermon maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm the worship pastor at the church. And so he wanted it read. And so I just kind of like recited it while, our electric player played some nice noodly things underneath it. And I was like, oh, great. It's a Sunday for the offering time. I have to like read this poem. And it just like, while I was reading it, it hit me so hard. It didn't hit me when I was practicing it. Didn't hit me at any time, but when I was up there, and it just for the last 3 or 4 years has stuck with me. It's such a beautiful representation of what we should be and how we should act and how we should try to see the world. And so it's always just kind of stuck with me.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think in the ancient parable, like the Indian ancient parable, the blind men actually begin to fight with one another and like hurt each other. They're all very convinced that their own perspective of the elephant was the only way. And so they end up going to blows with one another rather than realizing that perhaps they just don't have the perspective of the other person. It's kind of like, looking at a different side of the same playground. Every child is going to have a different perspective of it.
Yeah. Have you seen on Hulu In and of Itself?
Yes.
Because he takes a whole different angle on the poem from the perspective of the elephant.
Yes.
And imagine if you're an elephant and 6 random blind people get together and only seeing one part of you, they collectively decide who you are. That like blew my mind, like a whole different perspective on the poem that I hadn't even thought of, that we allow people to define us in that way. It's such an awesome take on it. I was blown away by that. And I felt kind of dumb because I hadn't thought of it. And I have like this whole podcast that's about it, but that's another story.
I mean, I'm sure there will be ample opportunity for you to put your own spin on it.
Where in the world are you right now?
I'm in Nashville right now.
You're in snow.
Yes, I'm in snow. I'm in about 8 inches of snow, which I completely adore. And every single year, Nashvillians like freak out as if we don't have snow
Mm.
literally every single year. But
Yeah.
we don't really have the infrastructure or the machinery to be able to clear roads. So it's actually pretty dangerous. My children have been out of school now this is their second week. So I'm enjoying
Mm.
that for sure.
Yeah. Nashville is the hotspot. I've had many friends from LA moving to Nashville over the last couple years.
Oh, have you?
A
Okay.
lot, a lot of music industry people. Nashville's got a lot more going on than LA does right now. So I have a lot of friends out there. It's kind of sad.
I know. I love Nashville. It's great. I love LA though too. I love it
Yeah.
all. They're all very unique in their own way.
So you've had a slash career, mother slash artist slash speaker slash a lot of different things.
Mhm.
What is occupying most of your time right now? What have you been able to do during this crazy COVID year? How has that all looked for you this last year?
Man, it's been brutal to be honest. CAA let go about 300 of their top agents. And so, I mean, my tour was canceled. Everything has been canceled, as many artists have been. But quite frankly, Eric, I've been going through such you can call it a spiritual crisis, you can call it a spiritual transformation, but this kind of moment of darkness for me, I mean, obviously it's been incredibly traumatic for us as in our, just as a world for us to deal with everything with COVID. But for me personally, it's almost been a welcome gestation
Mm.
for myself. This moment of darkness, this moment of quiet, to be able to um, really just focus inward and be able to be alone and read a lot and discover really what is happening to myself.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about that. We talk a lot about deconstruction on this podcast, about moments in life where you have to look at what you believe and reevaluate. And a lot of it is from, what we grew up learning and what was kind of instilled in us.
Yeah.
What was that foundation layer for you? You were a PK, I think I
Yes,
remember. Is that the foundation layer for you? You always grew up in church?
yes, I did. And I was in the church every single time that the doors were open. And I love it. I loved the church, grew up loving the church. My dad is a wonderful man, very gracious man. And so I had this beautiful foundation, a very protected foundation of religion and faith, and without even knowing it, expectation of what a woman is and what her roles are. My mom had 6 children and worked from home. And so there was, it was a very safe, beautiful environment for which I'm very, very grateful. I know that it offered me a lot of protection. But honestly, 5 years ago, when I had my second daughter, my third child, that was like a moment for me. You know how all of deconstruction, it sort of gathers itself until you can't ignore it any longer.
Yeah,
So
totally.
for me, 5 years ago, I was sitting on a sofa with my newborn baby, and I'm getting ready to go on tour. And so I have 4 months ahead of me, this big tour with an infant, and I'm trying to take care of her. I have 2 other children. I'm completely scatterbrained. I have like this giant donut thing around my midsection. I'm completely out of shape. I'm expected to dance and to sing and to speak for all of these events everywhere. And I just was out of sorts. I was thinking, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? What am I doing in my career? Why have I chosen this career? Just pretty flooded with self-doubt. And so I went to the very places that I have always gone, which are the Christian books on femininity and on womanhood. And I opened them up and began to read. And they all had, the underlying theme of wife and mom, and reading the word and going to church and being discipled and discipling women. And I'm looking at my infant, and I looked at her and I thought, if these books are true, then my daughters have no purpose yet. They have no value yet before God. They have no worth before God. They're basically just here until they can procreate and get married and read the
Yeah.
Bible. And I thought, either that's true or this is total bullshit.
Yeah.
All of this that I've just ingested, it was never really directly taught to me like a woman belongs at home. Obviously, like we're all too smart to say things in such a brash way. It's all very under the table, you know, it's all very nuanced in its effect on us. But nevertheless, I'm staring at my daughters thinking, I don't want this God for them. I don't want a God that's so confined by gender, by the walls of the church, by you know, these cherry-picked verses that we've decided that we're going to build an entire political stance on. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want a small God anymore. I certainly don't want that small God for her, for my children. And so that really began to be this moment where everything around me, I'm like, okay, it's all dismantling around me, because now what works for me has to work for her, you know? And the truth that I'm going to tell myself is also the truth that I need to be able to carry across the world to the woman who doesn't know how to read and will never be able to read the scripture, and the girl that has Down syndrome and may never be able to cognitively understand these theological truths.
Sure.
Like God's got to be a bigger God and be able to reach any and every one, regardless of what our capacity is, or else God is not God.
Right, right. When you started to have those thoughts, when you started to have those doubts and feelings, were there people out there? Did you find people out there that were having those similar thoughts where you got answers, or was it kind of more of an inward struggle for a while?
Oh my goodness, no, it's completely inward. It's completely inward. In fact, anytime I vocalize any sort of
But
curiosity,
inward because you couldn't find anybody who was talking about it, or inward because you were afraid to say it?
both. Like I don't know that I necessarily had the tools to say, oh, I'm in a spiritual awakening. I didn't even know the word deconstruction until I knew to search for deconstruction. And then at that point it's too late. But for me, no, it was a very internal progression. It was the next year I began to write my book, Pull It Off. And in so doing, I made the biggest mistake of my entire adult life, some would say, which was that I started to read. Like, I picked up a goddamn book, you know? And it became an obsession over, now it's been 4 years of just clamoring, clawing for any amount of information that I can get. And I mean, I read every single work by Plato. I got Plato tattooed on my arm. Your wife painted Plato on a jacket for me because his work just opening up my eyes. And then Walt Whitman, say that Walt Whitman ruined my life. And then Margaret Fuller and Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then reading about these phenomenal historical women like Joan of Arc, who's listening to the voice of God within her very soul. So it was lonely, but it wasn't lonely in so much as all of my friends were dead.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the conservative Christian world, that would be considered leaving the church for finding answers. Did you feel like you were leaving Christianity to find answers, or did you feel at that time that you were finding God outside of Christianity?
I don't know that I would have been able to say exactly what it was. It was sort of like showing up to the hospital like, oh, my stomach really hurts, man. And the doctor's like, girlfriend, you're having a baby right now. Like that's sort of how my spiritual awakening was. It was like, holy shit, I didn't even know I was pregnant, you know? So I didn't have the language and the words. And this entire time I'm working in the church. I'm writing a book about it. I'm speaking in the church. I'm singing for the church. I love the church. I have this very sincere desire for it. But I also have always found God in God's most undiluted, unsterilized form in nature. When I was a child, it was me out in the back in the woods and the trees, being able to commune with God and feel the presence of God in a way that I was never able to feel in any kind of institutionalized format.
Yeah. I mean, it's well documented on this podcast. I talk about it way too much, but my deconstruction started when I fell in love with musical theater.
Yeah.
And I just saw like these amazing truths. I was having like these deeply spiritual experiences.
Mhm.
And I felt at that moment, being a worship pastor, that I was like cheating on God. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yes.
like I was finding these, I felt guilty for the experiences I was having outside of
Mhm.
Christianity,
Mhm.
because I was raised, and I wasn't like explicitly raised to believe this, but I grew up thinking that everyone outside of Christianity was, you know, writhing in agony, that they
Mhm.
were experiencing no joy. I didn't recognize at that point that what I really believe is that God is working through all things, all people, all things, and
Yes.
that shared truth, that shared experience is something that is beautiful, and it's not something that we should be ashamed of. It's
Yes.
something that we should celebrate.
Exactly. And I think that that goes back to what I would say is my absolute truth, which is the belief in Imago Dei, that every human being, regardless of gender, race, sexual orientation, ability, has been made in the image of God, bearing then an imprint of God, God's own self upon your life, which means that you, Eric, carry a unique imprint of God that I do not carry. You know, and
Right.
it shows up in your desires, it shows up in the way that you worship, it shows up in your proclivity, in your art, it shows up in the way that you love.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only is that freedom and liberation, but it also allows us to celebrate, you know, the differences in one another. So I am no longer threatened by the differing beliefs of another person so long as they're not oppressing other people,
Yeah.
because fundamentally speaking, there is total inerrant equality before God because of the fact that we've been made in the image of God. It's as if God fractioned his self, herself into every single person that has
Yeah.
ever faced the planet.
And
We're not
is
one
and is
person.
alive and active and working in that.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. When you started to go through this process and you started to say things out loud, was there backlash from your community?
Yes. So I took about 9 months off of social media, just going through a massive personal change in my life and spiritual transformation, and just really honestly needing to protect my own soul, needing
Yeah.
to protect like that very small mustard seed. I mean, I think that the Bible is very correct in that analogy, in that it's very it's teeny tiny, but that little sucker is like white fucking hot, like the center of the fire hot, you know. And so while everything around me, all of the superfluous things of God and of religion were falling away, that is what remained. And so I knew that for myself, I needed to protect that. I needed to protect myself. And so I took that period of time to sort of, what I believe Elizabeth Gilbert says, grow your bones, you know.
Mm.
And but when I came back onto social media and into just the public eye in general, there was extraordinary backlash,
Mm.
extraordinary, um, from strangers. I mean, even I got multiple death threats and, you know, pleads for me to rot in hell and burn with Satan. I mean, the response was overwhelmingly crippling. And it was everything I could do just to simply hold on to the belief that I am God's and
Yeah.
that God exists within me. And it's, you know, it's important that I'm here, you know, because
Yeah. No,
when
I've
around
had
me was so
this
terrified.
I've had this conversation with a lot of people who have a lot of followers and are in the public eye. And our pastor, he always gives this analogy of your heart being like a castle, that there are different levels of protection that we have. And we only allow people have to prove their way in through the gate, through the iron wall, through the moat, you know, all the way into our hearts. And we have done a better job in society of doing that, of equipping people to say no, how to set boundaries. But then like social media just lets people dig a tunnel underneath into places that they shouldn't be. that they shouldn't allow, you would never let that person into your house to say that to your face.
Right.
But social media allows those people, you set up all these boundaries in your life. Social media allows people just to go right underneath them into places that they shouldn't be. Has that been a weird experience for you?
I don't know that I would call it weird, but it definitely it's been eye-opening to me, because I think that the degree to which I have absorbed applause, I've also realized is the degree to which I absorb hatred.
Yeah.
And so it has been a learning lesson for me, and a very valuable lesson for me, to believe my truth, and to really and truly, I know people say this all the time, but I don't need to explain myself. The people that are just dead set on not understanding me or criticizing me, those are not my people.
Yeah.
And they need to go and find their people to follow. But I will say, for someone such as myself that feels like I walk with my heart literally just pumping on my sleeve for anyone to see, that I do by nature just always empathize with that person. I don't absorb their pain. I certainly don't absorb any shame any longer. I don't give any time to it anymore. I just don't. But I think that that's something that has to be learned.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have this experience, you're sitting there with your kid, you have this big awakening that leads you down all these paths. Did it change? Did it change the way that you write? Did it change the things you wanted to talk about? How did it change kind of your career path from that point?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I became obsessed would be an appropriate word, obsessed with the concept, with the truth of Imago Dei. What does this mean? And how does it actually apply? How does it actually apply within the church, within relationship, within child rearing? Like, how do we visually see this if we are truly equal? And for me, what sort of the domino effect of the belief of total and inerrant equality is that I'm not going to ever say again to my LGBTQ community that they're wrong. I will never say that again. And I'm going to come out in full support of them. I'm going to come out in full support of the Black Lives Matter movement. It made me so brave, this idea that we are equal before God has this leveling effect, that every single human is deserving of every single thing that is good, that I feel like I deserve, that I know that my daughter deserves, that I know that my son deserves. And so what it did is, it did radically shift. It radically shifted the ways in which I saw myself playing into American Republican society, just for the sake of being liked and approved of. I realized.
Was that your audience at that time?
Yes, I would say so. The American evangelical world, which is, I would say, predominantly of the Republican politics, we know that just from pure numbers, yes, is definitely my audience. And in that way, it feels like such an honor to no longer swallow who I am to appease, no longer temper or adjust to be liked.
Yeah.
But that moment with my daughters, it was like, you're fighting for them. You're fighting for their future and for the future of every little girl like them or not like them, to have this inherent equality. And that shows up in patriarchy, within marriages, within the church system, within, politics and everything, our work environment, everywhere. So it basically like ruins your life. Because you realize the entire system that's in place, and you see the work that you have cut out in front of you.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like spiritually homeless? Like, did you ever feel like, I'm going through something that nobody else is going through? I don't fit the labels that they were putting on me before this moment. Did you feel kind of like an identity crisis in that?
Yes. And then I'll tell you where I ended up.
Yeah.
Um, I ended up that spiritually homeless is my most favorite place to be. Um, but yes, initially when I was going through this transformation, the pull to be liked and approved of, the pull to be thought of like as the good Christian woman and the good Christian leader is so extraordinarily strong
Yeah.
and
Well, and I would imagine you were really good at it.
very good.
Yeah.
I mean, look how big my smile is,
Yeah,
you know?
I've always been really good at like doing church. I mean,
Yeah,
I've always known how to do church.
right.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget a therapy session that I was in where the therapist was of the Christian, the traditional Christian mindset. And I came out of that therapy session and I pounded the granite countertop in my bathroom.
Mm.
Not out of frustration with her, not out of frustration with the church or anyone else, out of frustration with myself. And I pounded it again. I pounded it until my knuckles were bleeding. And I'm sitting there weeping, going, just stop changing. Just
Mm.
stop. Like unlearn everything that you've learned, unsee everything that you can see. It's like shove the baby back into the like back into the womb.
Yeah.
Stop. It's too painful. It's going to ask too much of you. It's going to demand too much of your heart, you
Mm.
know? And so in that respect, I mean, I've had two babies without even a pill of Tylenol, and birthing myself, the rebirth of myself spiritually was more painful
Mm.
than even carrying and bearing my children. And that is because the expectation and the limitation of traditional religion is so finite, is so fine-tuned.
Yeah.
We've so particularly quantified and qualified God and who God is and is not accepting of.
Yeah.
How I can measure myself up against you and you against me. So there becomes this spiritual hierarchy. And I was really fucking tall at that spiritual hierarchy. I was up there,
Yeah. Yeah.
on the
Well,
totem.
why do you think it is? Why do you think those structures have been created?
I think it's honestly, I think it's the nature. I think it's human nature to desire to do that. I think
Mm.
that when we desire to limit and confine God, when we're uncomfortable with the expansion of God, but we want to limit and confine God, then that requires a litmus test of sorts. That
Mm.
requires a system.
Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
when there is the leveling ground of equality, and when there is the leveling ground of an all-loving, expansive God, well, then all of your measuring systems, none of them apply any longer.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's fear is a big root of it. And like you said, like when you're afraid, the first thing you want to do is to define it.
Mm.
I want to, I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me when I die. So I'm just going to narrowly define it in a way that I fit in. And if people don't fit into that, oh well. I would love your take on this as someone who has kind of been in and around the Christian industry. Do
Mhm.
you think that Christian industry in general also contributes to that in narrowly defining what a Christian is and what Christianity is?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you can ask that of anything that sort of labels itself as Christian. Anytime you attach Christian to something that you're doing, I think that sort of we by nature categorize things. And
Yeah.
so, um, I remember one time being in an interview where I said, this was when I was in college, I was interviewing for a personal assistant job. And I said, I don't think that God ever intended for there to be a category of worship music.
Yeah.
And she hired me based upon that comment. But now looking back, I mean, I think that even that, I don't know that it, um, I think that we should be able to be well versed enough and global enough in our perspective that label of Christian is not threatening to us. Like, we should be able to see and realize the fact that there are over 40,000 denominations of Christianity worldwide. And so while American Christian pop, Julianna Zobrist, might be like one subcategory of tens of thousands other subcategories, I think that in and of itself is wrong. But I do think that the global perspective of Christianity and religion at large is probably what we're lacking, more so than the need to eradicate a label.
Yeah. No, for sure. I wonder if through, what I really wonder, and this is not meant to like be a judgment on the entire industry, I wonder if Jesus was to come back and turn over the tables outside the temple of people making money off of the temple, what he would turn over now. There are people making a ton of money by like narrowly defining what worship music is, by narrowly defining what books are appropriate in Christendom. And it makes me uneasy, especially like as a worship pastor of kind of a local community church. I struggle all the time with what worship music has been defined as, because especially with young adult generation, they watch a song and it's in a 20,000 seat arena with a huge production, and then they come to church and go, wow, that song isn't the way that I just saw it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I wonder how much the industry of Christianity is too narrowly defining Christianity. And that's something that I constantly push against, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that you can create an industry out of the soul work of like God internal,
Sure.
Like anything that's an industry is going to have money attached to it. And I mean, I don't know that I would even begin to know where to speak into that, but I do think that's what we are lacking, is the emphasis on your internal relationship with God, your own divinity, listening to your gut, actually trusting your heart. For me, it's more the narratives of like, you're broken, you're fallible, you're evil, you're depraved, you're separated from God, you're nothing without him, that causes these little girls at 7 years old to stand up in front of a baptism and confess their sins. What sin? What are you confessing? You've done nothing. Yeah. Like, you are purely, in my head, I just want to hold their hands and stare at them in the eyes and say, you are completely and totally loved by God. You are here on purpose. If God does not make mistakes, then your humanity is not a mistake.
Right.
You have nothing to confess. You have everything to own. You have everything to hold on to. You have everything to trust. Believe your gut. And that for me is where I get pissed, because a lot of Christianity has been built and maintains its power on the assumption and expectation that all of these little kids are walking around not trusting themselves and blindly trusting the people on the stage. Not that they're not good people, good men, good women leading, but we're not taught to trust God within.
Right.
We're not taught to trust the voice of God, the experience of God.
Right.
And so we never grow. We end up just walking around little like stamps of one another.
Right. Always feeling guilt and shame instead of growing into that Imago Dei, as you said.
Right.
You said you want to stay spiritually homeless. What does that mean? What does that mean to you?
There's a famous quote, and it's going to lapse my mind at this moment who said it, but he said something to the effect of, if I am always at home within myself, then I'm never truly alone. Or I can be a wanderer anywhere, but I'm always at home. So, my life verse is not a Bible verse. It's a quote by Walt Whitman, who said, to re-examine all that you've learned in school, in church, and in any book, and dismiss whatever insults your own soul.
Mm.
And I hold to that so steadfastly, because there's so much autonomy and so much sovereignty there, that I can believe and I can hear and listen to God within, so much so that I can dismiss whatever insults my own soul, because I know that I've been made in the image of God, my own unique imprint of the image of God.
Right.
And so spiritually homeless to me means that I'm always at home within myself.
Right, right. I mean, like the kind of the inherent danger in something like that is then we have a bunch of people who are just going off of their own guts. But you're saying the Imago Dei is what connects us all in that.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. And I believe if it is God within, that there is no danger in
Yeah.
going off of, our gut, because it will manifest itself in love and in
Yeah.
growth and in belonging and kindness.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I love it. I think one of the things in my deconstruction that I've really focused on is I don't want to deconstruct my beliefs to then just reconstruct Eric's beliefs in 2021. Like
Mm-hmm.
I always want to be in a constant state of deconstructing. Like
Mm-hmm.
and I feel so much more comfortable there than where I was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And partly because, just growing up, at least I was taught that doubt equaled lukewarm and God spits you out.
Right.
And that's just like that can't possibly be the case. Like there are so many examples of God honoring doubt in the Bible and people who didn't fully get it, and that was an okay process to be in. But the last thing I want to do is think that in 2021 I'm gonna get all the answers. You know what I mean?
No,
Like
how bold.
I want to, yeah, and to know that I'm teaching with my best intentions. I'm teaching my daughter stuff that she will have to deconstruct from
Mm-hmm.
later in life because
Mm-hmm.
it's just how I'm processing it right now. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if nothing else, I want her to grow up knowing that it's okay to doubt, it's okay to question, it's okay. If I
Mm-hmm.
start from that point with her, then at least she'll be able to reconcile all the wrong things I'm teaching her, I guess.
I don't know. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. I mean, I think that often when we're told, don't doubt God or don't doubt, it's basically just somebody saying, don't doubt the system.
Yeah.
Just shut the hell up and stop asking questions, because
It's usually I don't know the answer to what you're asking, so just don't doubt. Don't doubt.
exactly, exactly. It's maintenance of a power system to me. But I mean, I think that, like, how boring would it be to have a God that's so easily defined, so that
Yeah.
in our minuscule 80 years something, or however old your life, that we've figured it out? Like,
Yeah.
why would we want that? I have no desire for that type of God. I have
Yeah.
every desire for every mystery of God, every evolution of the way that God shows up. I mean, history is consistently repeating itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this,
You said earlier that you love the church. You grew up in the church. You loved your parents. You had a reasonably good PK experience from what other
yeah.
people have sometimes. Do you have hope for the church, and specifically, I guess, the American church? Do you have hope for the church moving forward?
I think that the church that I have found, is certainly not a church within any walls right now.
Mm.
It feels to me a sleeping giant of sorts, of women who are coming alive in their largeness, of these angry women who are impassioned and full of truth and full of, like, this pent up, knowledge of the femininity of God. Um, I think that we're raising an entire generation of children that are going to grow up knowing that they're actually very loved and they're not ruined,
Mm. Yeah.
and they're not a mistake.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do we have if we don't have hope?
Yeah.
I used to think of hope as somewhat of like tossing a coin into a wishing well. It's just sort of the luck of the draw. But now I see when you ask me, do I have hope for the church? I have hope for the people of God, which is all of us, to love one another and to seek to understand rather than to be right. I have hope for equality. I have hope for justice. I have hope for charity to reign and compassion to reign.
Right.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I guess the question just kind of stems from where evangelical Christianity is right now.
Right.
And there's never been a form of Christianity that has stayed, that has lasted. It's a lot of it is man-made, and man-made things will fall. I hope that, and part of this podcast has been interesting because I felt very spiritually homeless and I felt very alone until I started releasing these and started to hear from people. And so I agree, there is an underground swelling of people who are ready for something new.
Yes.
Who look at it and go, we want to live like Jesus. We don't want to build Rome. We don't want to build an empire. We don't want to control politics. We don't give a crap about any of that stuff. We will be good citizens, but that's not the goal of what we're trying to do. We want to love each other. We want to question. We want to doubt. We want to process. We want to try to get through this life as best humans as we possibly can be.
Yeah.
And for me, that's where my hope is in those conversations that I have.
Same. And I think if you like 4-wall church, there is some serious reconsideration that has to happen. You have got to stop teaching your oppressive theologies. You've got to stop.
See, that's where my hope ends, though.
Church
I think it's going to die.
There. You think it's going to die?
I think it's going to die before it changes.
Well, that has to die. Yeah. That has to die. The spirit, the weaponization of the Bible to justify hatred and oppression and ignorant politics has got to die. Yeah. It has to die, or else everyone will leave. We're too smart. Like the games, we can smell the BS from miles away now, like there are enough informed, intelligent men and women who do love Jesus, who are feminists, who do believe in equality, who do want to march at the Black Lives Matter movement, who do want equality for our LGBTQ neighbors. That's what we want. We want that. We want science back in our churches.
Yes.
Yeah. We're not going to just like passively swallow the roofie pill of ignorance any longer. It's not going to work.
Because they're not mutually exclusive. You can fully believe in science and God at the same time.
Yes. Okay. And the fact that we have to say that on a podcast is like really disheartening.
No, but we totally do.
But we do.
We totally do.
Yes, we do.
We totally do. And we have to say things like, we can't just keep sitting inside 4 walls of a church and defining who other people are and defining what's wrong and what's right without actually going and having conversations with them.
And we cannot also just say all are welcome. If I see one more, can we use adult language on your podcast? I didn't ask. I think I've already said it. If I see all are welcome one more fucking time, I'm going to lose my mind. I want to know who's leading worship. Yeah. Like what woman do you have? What trans Black man do you have that's on your elder board? Who do you have representing leading?
Yeah.
So long as qualified men and women and others are excluded from positions in leadership because of race, gender, sexual orientation, or ability, I am done. Done.
So not just acceptance on a sign, but actual inclusion.
Yes. In your leadership. That's what I want to see.
Yeah. What do you have coming up that you're excited about? What is your passion moving forward? What is the next stage in your life look like?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's so uncertain, as so many people are just right now. Everyone I think is trying to be creative. Right now, so much of my passion is going into my book club. I have a Read with Jules book club. And it is a precious community. There's about 318 of us. And we study different books that have meant something to me. And we're working on developing that. We're creating some really cool new content and some fun things within it. So it's going to get larger. So right now, that's really where my main passion is, because I do believe, for anyone that's listening that's like, okay, I feel like I'm deconstructing, but I don't really know where to start, or I feel like this is happening, but I don't know what to say. There's so much wonderful literature out there, from people, from dead people to people that are alive, right now, that can aid in this spiritual awakening that you're walking through. So I say that just to say that that is what I am thrilled about, is reading with men and women, predominantly women, and really getting vulnerable and telling the truth about our stories, and allowing literature to liberate, which, I mean, for me, quite honestly, like I said, worst mistake, the worst thing I ever did in my life was pick up a book,
Yeah.
because, but that really did become the totem pole of my liberation. And I want to offer that for other women as well.
Awesome. How can people get involved with what you're doing, follow what you're doing?
Follow me on Instagram. It is literally the only place that I am active, but I am very active there. So you can reach out on DM and follow along. And then all of the information about the book club and everything that I'm doing, I always just, that's my go-to place. Those are my people. So
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I love your heart. I love what you got going on, and I really appreciate you coming on.
thank you so much for having me.